Like all the CO2 that's in the air right now came because of burning fossil fuels, and it was basically decomposing plants that created oil. And every time you disturb the soil, you're releasing more CO2. I've seen statistics that say more CO2 has been gone into the air from bad agriculture than all of the fossil fuels ever burned. So it's a area of CO2 release into the atmosphere that I think is going largely ignored. And what we're finding that's so exciting is that by grass farming, by really enhancing your pasture, by infiltrating water, adding compost teas, and then taking the animals and moving them around and mimicking wild herds, same thing, observe wild herds, take your cattle, instead of letting them just spread out, or sheep, move them around like a wild herd and rotate them more frequently. They're actually sucking huge amounts of carbon out in the air. We're actually doing data, getting data. There's a 3-year study that started last March to start looking at how much carbon is actually getting sequestered back into the soil. And when you do it with grasslands, when it goes back into the soil, it will stay there for virtually ever until somebody comes along and disturbs the soil. If we can build our soil back up again on all the arable land on the planet, let's not think small here, we could start to bring our CO2 levels down to pre-industrial levels, because that's where the CO2 came from to begin with. And even the U.S. Department of Energy recognizes that it's through plants is one of the best ways to get carbon back out of the air and back into the soil. And of plants, grasses are one of the best, because they unless, assuming you maintain good land practices, best practices for land management into the future, that carbon will stay there and just become a nutrient house for all the biology that's in the soil that really does the work of life.
So what would you do with all of the, essentially on life support, vast agricultural lands and like the breadbasket where they're just pumping hydrocarbons in to get up the wheat every year?
Right. So what would we do there?
Yeah.
Well,
people to eat less wheat, first of all?
Well, yeah, I'm on a wheat-free diet myself. In fact, that was one of the points I was going to make around this issue, is we have to diversify our diets. The indigenous people who lived in Northern California had over 1,500 plants that they ate. That's just plants. They had a very diverse diet.
And that was just an oral tradition? They would know which plants to eat and would be passed along?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, one of the things that we're also looking at is the phenomena of cultural mentoring, and how the grandmas and grandpas in traditional cultures, nurtured and helped their young ones grow up to become so literate. You could take an indigenous native boy or child, boy or girl, delete that, child, here, and they could have more ecological knowledge than a PhD academic of their place here.
Well, personally, I know that if I was to be
years.
lost in the forest, I would probably try gnawing on a few roots and bark, and then I would drop dead of starvation.
You'd probably poison yourself.
Yeah, but you would know how to get along?
Yeah.
Lucky you.
Well, and when the settlers came out here, Lewis and Clark, one of the biggest deaths, reasons for death was poisoning, food poisoning.
Because they didn't know what to eat.
They didn't know what to eat. They didn't know how to store their food properly.
And then Indians weren't really telling them at that point.
Probably not at that point.
So you tell me about your wilderness. What did you had a word for it?
Agroforestry.
Agroforestry. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we grow. Well, here on this farm we're very coastal, so we have a lot of fog. We grow a lot of fruit. So we have fruit and nut trees. We do a lot of herbs and berries. And then we have a lot of greens and garlic and root vegetables. So we have all of that. Another mainstay of our farm here is goats. We have goats. We have goat milk, goat yogurt, goat kefir, goat cheese, goat feta, cheddar, chev. So we make cheese and we milk the goats. And they are up there right now, just in the chaparral. You can kind of hear the bells tinkling. That's the goats. That's how we find them. They just free range here, and they eat the coyote bush and some of the other, just forbs and things around, and they take all that wildness and all that goodness, and then they just funnel it through into their milk, and then we drink their milk. So it's really delicious milk. And, you know, one of the things the vision that I have, you know, to deal with the issue that you're talking about is all these vast amounts of, you see all these huge, you know, corn and wheat and soybeans. That's all for export. You know, those communities are not eating that food. And there's something fundamentally askew when we're, you know, ordering apples from New Zealand and tomatoes from Mexico, and then, you know, in the farm countries often is where you have the least amount of fresh food. Sometimes in the suburbs, in certain suburbs like the Bay Area where there's a lot of home gardeners growing food, there's more fresh food in the suburbs often than there is in these farmlands that you're talking about, unless the farmers have their own home gardens. So nowadays, there's more and more farms that are shifting over to organic and doing, you know, community-supported agriculture where they're growing a diverse amount of crops. And the advantage of that is that, you know, you've heard that term feast or famine. That often comes from farming because, you know, you might have a bad year and you have a monoculture and you're toast. One flood in Mississippi and those people are wiped out for the whole year. Whereas here, you know, we have apples and pears and plums and peaches and raspberries and strawberries, garlic. We don't grow everything out as a crop, but we've got about 200 fruit trees, and we grow a few things like garlic and strawberries and raspberries. We're going to be planting more. We're experimenting with asparagus. It seems to be doing really well here. And then medicinal herbs. We're going to start a whole healing garden here and growing a lot of medicinal herbs and making essential oils and hydrosol, which is the water that comes when you make it a little bit of oil, but the hydrosol is also very useful. Mm-hmm. And then also having people just come.
Sorry, what is hydrosol?
It's when you distill oils from plants.
I see.
It's the water that gets distilled out from the plants, and you extract the oil. But then you might get, you know, an ounce of oil, but you might get 5 gallons of hydrosol, which doesn't last as long, but it's incredibly beneficial. Flower essences and all, you know, you can use them as spritzers and culinary, and it's just, there's a lot also just being around the plants. Plants have been on this planet for 300 million years or more. That's what, by our calculations so far. And humans have barely made 1 million years, really, if that. And so we're the babies, we're the infants on the block. And these plants have been around for you know, hundreds of millions of years. What have they been doing all these years, you know? I think that there's so much more to the level of intelligence of nature that we, with our logical minds, are having a very hard time tuning into. In fact, I think our logical minds, we give it so much power that it's shutting us off from a huge conversation that's going on in the natural world with creation that's older than time itself. And you know, to think about consciousness, when you tap into that intelligence, which is when people who are connected to nature, that's what we do. And you start to see this incredibly sublime, vast body of knowledge, wisdom, information that's coming out of the non-human world. It becomes like embedded in all of us that we need to look after this, and we need to protect this, because this is it. I mean, this is our source of life.